The real thing for me is like, I learn the best when I am in the trenches. You just don't learn the same when you're at the peak. You learn when you're in the trenches so you could get to the peak. And I do view Home Vault as the trenches. It's tough to merge 4 companies into one, have 6A personalities, 4 separate company cultures, 4 separate sets of processes without disrupting somebody. When we do this, there's going to be people we have today that aren't going to be with us in the future. What got us here is not going to get us there. Welcome, entrepreneurs, to Pay or Quit,
where we reveal the gritty truth behind business success.
People see the glory, but not the struggle it takes to get there.
We're here to share the real stories of entrepreneurs navigating the tough intersection of business and relationships. I'm Tony Cline.
And I'm Shawn Johnson. And together we'll guide you through the real challenges faced as serial entrepreneurs.
Join us for the untold stories behind the scenes.
Buckle in. It might get messy. Here we go, Tony. We got season 1, episode 1. That was really fun. It was great to just kind of catch up there. And, you know, I've heard your background before, but every single time we talk about it, I gain a little bit more and a little bit more. It's not like you're being an onion, but it's funny how we talk. We just flavor it, put some more seasoning on it. And it's just super enjoyable to me. So today we're going to get on with Home Vault merger, what it did to company culture, systems and processes in trying to merge a company like that. We'll talk about details there. What or why we didn't just merge on our own, you and I and Kristen, and then the week the internet turned green. I like how you put that. So
first of all, why does anybody or would anybody even care about our Home Vault merger and what we went through? One of the big lessons that I took away from it was when we did our merger, we wanted to, and this was honestly, we did our merger before Pure was even on the map. Right now, legally from their framework, I don't know if they actually existed or not, but nobody had heard of them at that point. It was not the big bad monster in the room or whatever. The company that was going to take over property management at that point was Mind, and Mind was really the biggest player. And I know Home River Group was around, but really, I think at least in the circles we ran in, Mind was kind of the Zillow of the industry. Sort of, they were the ones that were going to
see them tapering. It was interesting because they had a plateau there somewhere, and it seemed like when we were starting to really formulate these ideas in this merger thought was when Mind was on the decline. At least from my perspective, it seems like Mind was no longer front of mind. They were back of mind, if you will.
Yeah. And they were, some of the lessons that we tried to take away from what we heard from them was that they came in and they tried to systematize everything and provide property management for really discounted rates. And they really didn't, at least this is, my perspective, but at least from my perspective, I didn't see that they actually knew how to run the boots on the ground part of the operations. And so when we looked at doing our merger, we looked at what are we actually going to provide to the people that come into our system, and different than Pure, different than Mind, maybe different than Home River Group, but we really wanted to provide a platform or a system for small property management company owners, small mom and pop shops, or even up to 1,000 doors or whatever, but provide a platform where they could plug into and still be a part of the vision moving forward. And we can tell you a little bit about why that might not work in the future, and we can talk about.
It's important to add too is we bootstrapped it too. So the other big difference I think is Mind had VC money, probably several raises over. Home River Group, definitely, I think it's VC. I can't remember. But it has deep pockets, and we bootstrapped where we were at for Home Vault.
Yeah. And so, but trying to come together with first of all, what are we going to build? And then how do we actually roll that out? And the timing of that was really, turned out to be pretty darn important. The timing of when we announced our merger and when we rolled out. So, but maybe you can share. I know we touched on our conversation a little bit in Moab about us coming together, but why don't you touch on that a little bit more about how this whole thing got started?
We were in a mastermind together. I don't remember. We were in San Diego at some point at a NARPM event, and you pulled me aside and asked. I don't remember. I think you asked if I wanted to be in the mastermind, or if I asked you. I can't remember what it was. And we had this really good mastermind. They were all you're not competitors with each other, and we could just freely flow information. And we were probably in it for like 2 years before we had this conversation in Moab, is my guess. I remember joining the mastermind. It was about February of probably 2 years prior to, and I can't remember what year, but then we go to Moab in October of whatever year. And, we have this conversation. Hey, wouldn't it be cool to get the guys from the mastermind to form a national company that we can take to scale, bootstrap that, and just really have a bigger impact in the industry? Because I think I saw a lot of synergy in our mastermind and how we would talk and whatnot. But of course, it's when you're meeting an hour every week or two, you don't get that deep. You get deep, but you don't get that deep. You don't really know business philosophies
you don't spend 12 hours on a board meeting and a 12-hour Zoom deciding if you're going to sell the company.
Oh man, we should definitely talk about that meeting. That was interesting. So that's my recollection, and how the kind of Moab conversation was. It was just you, me, Kristen, and your wife Pam in the car, and we started talking about this. And it's funny. I remember this cool point. It was almost a ad lib comment. I meant it, but when we got done with the trip in Moab, you actually called me and said, "Hey, how serious were you about that?" And I was like, "Well, I don't know. How serious should I be?" And then Kristen was like, "Ooh, we should look at that," because Chris and I were at a similar place in our business where we were working very minimal hours. We had a great operations manager running the day-to-day. We were high profit, and we were giving a high level of customer service, and we were just doing great things, it felt like. And unfortunately, boredom and complacency sets in. Instead of looking towards, maybe there's another vertical integration business that I can add into my life. We looked at the merger side, and I say unfortunately, that's not what I mean like as a negative, but I think complacency in business can be negative. And so anyway, that's kind of how that came about.
Yeah, I remember we were in San Diego, and I can't remember if it was broker owner or national NARPM conference. It was one of the two. And I remember Kristen was supposed to be going with you or something. I can't remember exactly what it was, but there was something where she was going to have a conflict for like the first day or something. And you're like, "Hey, look, I'm already going. Do you want to go?" And I remember saying yes. And I had 36 hours to fly home from San Diego, pack my bag, get ready to go, and then meet you, drive out and meet in Moab. So it was a quick turnaround. But, being in that mastermind, we created some great relationships. And then the neat thing about that mastermind was that we all were trying to solve different things in our business. And so we could all bring different expertise to it. And we really provided each other a lot of value. One of the things that I really took away from that mastermind was, if you do get vulnerable with the things you're struggling with, there are people out there that have a solution. It's just, am I willing to be open enough to share the problem to get that solution? And that's why I think we were so excited about, I think the merger conversation actually came up of, hey, what else could we do? Could we do some shared branding? I think that's actually like the first step in that was, what if we've created a brand where we all were under the same brand so that we could use some economies of scale, get some name recognition across? And then that conversation kind of evolved into, well, what if we actually merged? It was very good times in the beginning, very positive and upbeat, and talking to the people in the mastermind and who was going to want in. We actually had a retreat where we all met together and spent a couple of days really hashing through what it would look like. And we were all really positive of looking at all the good things that could happen. I think we did a great job of, as visionaries, looking at all the possibilities. One of the challenges that came about, though, was we didn't spend enough time looking at what are all of the things that went wrong or could go wrong if we were only focusing on the positives. And that's been a huge learning experience for me, which is you got to look at both sides of the coin.
That's interesting. Yeah, I think that's typical in my nature too, is I don't know. I mean, I certainly weigh the pros and cons, but I think generally you downplay the cons a little bit more than you upplay the pros. And that's something, it's certainly something to be aware of. That's probably a flaw of myself. And so I turned a blind eye to some red flags. I think we all did, like there's some red flags there. And just full disclosure, by the way, like I am super glad and thankful we did Home Vault. That was a good thing for me. I learned a lot. I think it was I think there were some unnecessary challenges in life that you don't actually need to go through, but there was a lot of it that it was just like the real thing for me is like I learn the best when I am in the trenches. When you're facing failure, you just don't learn the same when you're at the peak. You learn when you're in the trenches so you could get to the peak. So that was, and I do view Home Vault as the trenches. It was a very tough, it's tough to merge 4 companies into one, have 6A personalities, 4 separate company cultures, 4 separate sets of processes, systems, philosophies of doing things into one without disrupting somebody, ruffling feathers with someone. It's just, and I knew, and I said at the very beginning, like when we do this, there's going to be people we have today that aren't going to be with us in the future. What got us here is not going to get us there.
Mm-hmm.
And so just my full disclosure, I'm glad we did it. I enjoyed it. I loved being a part of Home Vault. There was a lot of challenges, obviously. Water is pure when it's water. Oil is good when it's oil. But oil and water mixed together, you wouldn't want to drink it. You know what I mean? Like those are I'm using a metaphor, but there's some meaning of, it's just challenging to put things together like that. And I think there's some big companies right now facing that. I mean, the merger of Dodson Properties into Evernest, that has to be, they're facing some similarities as we did. I'm sure of it.
Yeah.
Pure. And every time they acquire another company, we'll have to talk about that because I was on that director level at Pure to help guide those decisions.
So let's save that part of the conversation for a little bit later. But let's circle back around and talk a little bit about, we've talked about Home Vault and our Home Vault merger. And I think, I won't say most people in the industry are aware of the Home Vault merger, but I will say there are a lot of people that know the story. But for the ones that don't, just kind of do a quick, like, what did we do?
Yeah, the summary I would say is that we took 5 companies in 7 different states, because some of us had more than one location, if you will, and merged them into one singular property management firm called Home Vault. You had already had the branding of Home Vault, and it was great. And I think all of the, I don't want to say all, most of the the key people in this merger were key people of influence in the industry already. So I'm gonna list names just so I'm talking as transparent as I can. Kristen Johnson, my wife, me, Tony Cline, obviously, Jay Barabee, Danny Pluteman, Matthew Tringali were the 6 in this merger. Matt and Danny had a company in Charlotte, and they were business partners already prior to, I think that's important. And Chris and I was business partners together.
You know what's funny about that is we were in the mastermind with Matthew for, like you said, almost 2 years. And it wasn't until we started having the conversation about the merger that we even knew that he had a business partner.
Did not even know. And it was actually like, what just happened? Because like we were talking to you, Matthew, about doing a merger together. And then all of a sudden there's this other person who we don't know. And I have gained just a ton of respect and affinity for Danny, by the way. Like we still talk on a regular basis. I love Danny. But I didn't know this guy at the time. And it was just like, who is this other person? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It was strange,
so we had spent a couple years developing these relationships with each other, kind of doing the dance, if you will, about who's going to come in and who's not. And frankly, there were some other people. Adam Willis was one of the people in our mastermind that came out to our retreat that wound up not being a part of the Humboldt merger. And I've talked to him a few times since then. I'd love to just have an open conversation with, does he feel like he dodged a bullet? Does he still have a little FOMO? What that looks like. But, we spent a lot of time with the guys that were in that mastermind trying to determine who was a good fit and who wasn't. So it was really odd that we had Danny being introduced sort of last minute as one of the key partners or the key operators of the company. And I agree. I think Danny's a great guy. But it was a challenge to bring somebody in to that type of conversation. So for somebody that's looking at, hey, I've got a good friend that is in property management and we're kind of in the same market and we're excited and we want to merge, I know we're kind of in the middle of outlining what happened, but I'd love to get hear what advice you might give to people who are looking at doing something like this, even on a smaller scale. So maybe we can circle back around to that.
Yeah, sure.
So we were in the middle of talking about, what happened, how the partners that we brought on. So you mentioned all of the partners that came together. There was another partner that wasn't in our mastermind, and that was Kristen. And so she had a lot of faith in your opinions as to whether or not it was a good decision. And I know we all came together and had that 2 or 3 day retreat where we kind of walked through it. But we essentially brought in 2 additional personalities into the mix, in addition to the people that were in the mastermind. And that definitely had some additional consequences that maybe we didn't foresee.
Yeah, totally. And, like I said, like even knowing the folks in our mastermind, you don't know their business of philosophies that deeply by just being in a mastermind together, first of all. And then you introduce 2 other people. Obviously, I know Kristen very well, but you guys didn't.
Right.
You knew Kristen, but not on the level that a business partner is needed. You need to know somebody intimately, I think, or have a silent partner to a certain realm. Like if you don't know them, cool, but they've got to agree and you've got to agree to keep them a silent partner. That's different. We didn't have silent partners here. We had active partners. Every one of us was to play a role in scaling this company and making it what it was or what it should be. We had all the big planning and the vision and how to get to X, Y, and Z doors and whatnot. And we had a role to play in that. And what was always attractive, I think, is that we all could niche down. Instead of being a single operator, you have to be all things to all people all the time. And what was attractive, I think, was like, well, all right, we get to niche down and be what my strength is, my superpower, if you will, and I get to play that part in this overall experience. The challenge is for people to actually stay in that and not flood over, give an opinion. It's good. That's good. We should have discord, right? And discourse. But once a decision's made, we got to roll with it and go, and that's
Yeah, one of
very
the
tough for 6 type A personalities.
yeah.
Actually, 2 of them were
So
type Bs, but
so first of all, from a financial standpoint, we made the mistake of staying top heavy because all of us that were partners, we wound up thinking, well, we're making a good wage now, or we have good compensation now. That really shouldn't change because we were able to run our business locally and make that money. So the money should still be in there. And we brought everybody together. We brought our systems together, our teams together, and we tried to figure out how to merge everything into one new company. But one of the things that we really, I think, was one of the downfalls was, number one, we kept everybody in the same compensation range. But the second thing that I think was really a downfall for us was that we all became members of the board, and we would have conversations and we would vote on how to operate, or we would vote on things. But at the end of that vote, I've been on other boards where when the board votes, whatever the vote is the official voice of the board. And there's no more discussion about it because you came together, you had a resolution. And we knew with the personalities that we were bringing together that we were going to have to pick somebody that was a strong leader that could lead us as our CEO. And frankly, one of the things that I said early on before we even merged was the only other person that I would be willing to serve in that leadership capacity
be led
was,
by. That's probably a better way
well,
to.
there is being led by, but there is a level of, as an entrepreneur,
Sure.
somebody that's used to running your own business, you have to make a mental decision that I'm going to be willing to serve this other leader that is going to take the reins and make decisions that you've been used to making for the last 17 or 18 years. And so there is a difference. There's being led by, and I'm totally happy to be led by somebody as long as they're making decisions that's in line with what I think should happen. It's a different conversation to say that I'm going to serve a leader or serve a mission that I agree with, maybe the philosophy, but not the strategy or the execution or whatever, something that you don't agree with. It takes a different mental capacity to say, I'm willing to, even though I don't know that this is the right step there or the step I would take, it's the step I'm willing to follow. And so we voted, we had the discussions. It wasn't like a contentious vote or anything, but we all decided that Shawn, we would have you be our CEO to lead us. And there's a lot of reasons why I was comfortable with that. But primarily it's just because I knew that you would try to do the right thing by the client and try to do the right thing by the team. And but as we talked about, you got a lot of leaders that are used to coming together. And so for the first 6 months, I really felt like you were more than 6 months probably, but you were handcuffed because in theory, even though we all agreed that you would have the final say, a lot of times you would only have the final say as long as everybody was in agreement with that. And if there was somebody that wasn't in agreement, they really would try to argue their case beyond even board meetings and taking it into staff and teams and processes and stuff like that. And so I think that was a big lesson that we learned, or at least that I learned, is in theory, it sounds good to keep all the people that know what's going on at the top, and keep them in the organization. But number one, it costs too much, and number two, it's just not great for the leader that's taken over.
Yeah, I can remember a few specific instances that we would walk out of a board meeting with a decision and a path forward, all in agreement. And the um the dissenting votes, if you will, on that decision, even though it was majoritied, um, would actually run with their old vote with the decision forward, and it actually caused mutiny in several instances. I mean, especially with processes. I remember that specifically. I'm not going to name names just to, but the reality is like you have to have a unified front out of a board meeting or whatever leadership meeting you have and move it forward. Even if you disagree, that's the decision the company has made and you got to go with it. I agree with you. I felt very handcuffed because of that. Like, even though I felt good out of a board meeting that we have a decision, this is what we're going to do. I've cast my vision. This is how we're going to go. Only to find out that behind the scenes, there was not that support. There was not that unification, if you will. Number two is I learned very fast, and I knew this before getting into it, but one of the biggest jobs that a CEO has to have is they have to be a double black belt in emotional stability. I was like the emotional sponge, if you will. And luckily, as one of my strengths is I keep a very level head. I don't do these big emotional dips up and down as a person. I stay pretty solid. But I would get phone calls from this partner and this manager and this whoever on the daily trying to just, that saying on Bad Boys, USA, he like rubs his ears, like let's just all calm down. But, I had to have a double black belt in just being emotionally stable, EQ, and you and I are very high in our EQ. I'm probably not that smart with an IQ. I'm, not the most intelligent guy. I'll just admit, but there was, partners on our team, and I'll just say Matthew. I think he's very intelligent, but has a very low EQ. So therefore, like, didn't really understand what the impact of these things were going to cause. Although he thought it was the right thing, that's cool. But there's an impact emotionally. People make decisions on emotions, not by logic, unfortunately. We're not robots is the point. And so that impact was very, very hard. So anyway, like my biggest takeaway there, like whatever a company does, no matter how a company is formed, no matter if you have partners or do not, you've got to face the world on a unified front. Even if you disagree with the decision, you just still got to be a good soldier, I guess. That way to say it,
And a good leader. I mean, there are times where I remember you and I having some conflict, which it wasn't often, but we would have conflict, but it was a respectful conflict, and that conflict stayed between the two of us. There weren't times where we'd have a conflict and then I'd run to tell people that were a part of my team and you'd run to tell people that were a part of your team. We just didn't do that. That wasn't
right.
We still handled it where it was sort of the voice of the board, and ultimately, you had the ultimate decision. And we did finally get to the point where we gave you the authority that you needed. But I think at that point, it was already in a situation that I wouldn't say beyond repair, but was going to take a lot more effort than some of the other options that came along later, and specifically, offers to buy the company. So, but before we get into that, let's talk about so eventually there were 6 of us that came together on the ownership side. Why did we decide, instead of just you and I going about it, why did we decide to bring other people into that mix?
From my perspective, it was looking at strengths and weaknesses of myself, like what is missing. I'm a visionary, big picture. I don't like to get into a lot of detail on the day-to-day. I think you and I shared that. As a matter of fact, I remember this comment you made to me one time. You said, I'm really good at getting 80% of the way. And then I have Barb for the other 20%.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And that was great because you guys had this great dynamic, this partnership. Well, I was similar. I could see things to the end, but I just love the big picture stuff, the casting the vision, and then having the team. I'm a great delegator, um, and having the team execute on the ideas.
Yeah.
Well, I knew that I need those high level executors. I needed somebody to implement and take those things further. And then the other piece is, dude, don't ask me about finances. I want to see a balance sheet and a P&L. I know exactly what a balance sheet and a P&L looks like and how to decipher the information there and make action. But I don't want to put the balance sheet and the P&L together. You know what I mean? Like the financial
Yeah.
stuff. So that was kind of there. Or at least that was my perspective. Like I felt like there were some substantial holes in having to merge this company, larger company across 7 markets together that I just personally didn't have the capabilities of, or the knowledge, I guess, or the want.
I think before we even got to the 6 markets and then eventually the 7 markets but even before that, we were trying to decide, do we even roll this out to the mastermind?
Mhm.
It was just
Right.
you and I talking, should we merge? And one of the things for me, you're right. I love it's funny that I do these long distance races and it actually you reminding me of that comment that I made about the 80%. I do these long races where I'll go out and run, 200 miles that take, 3 or 4 days to do. And it's the journey for me. The finish line isn't honestly that exciting. It's like it's over.
Mhm.
There's almost like this sense of I see the finish line and I'm already thinking what's next before I've even crossed that finish line. And so for me, it's when I get to the point where I know that we're going to be successful with something, I want to turn that out over to somebody else to just kind of wrap up and put the details on it and turn off the lights, and so maybe that's why I run these really long races where it's more about the process and the journey and the problem solving than it is about the actual finishing. But one of the reasons why I wanted to bring more people into it wasn't because I thought we had between the two of us that we had any deficiencies in being able to pull it off. It was I saw what we were talking about was going to be a great opportunity for people outside of the company or outside of our markets. Outside, we could bring in other companies, and then because we already had these relationships with some of these other guys, I thought, and it's funny because I don't know if we'll get into this today, but Home Vault Academy started, and we rolled off a kind of an educational and consulting arm that when we sold Home Vault, we closed that down and then opened up Better Who, and so it kind of continued on a little bit. It changed, but the point was we were bringing in other people, and at Better Who, when we were recreating that, one of the core values that we came up with was story matters most. And what we meant about that is you can have something that happens and it's the story that we tell about it that makes the difference. Whether it's to a landlord or to a tenant, it's all in your approach in communicating the event of what happened. And so for me, for us to bring all of these different markets, we were going to make a much bigger splash. And so I was looking at the story that it would tell to the industry that look what is new and exciting, and look what the opportunity is, and look what you could be a part of when we launched. And we were already in 6 states or 7 states at the time when we launched. So for me, that was I got excited about the story and not so much about how we were actually going to integrate all of these different teams. And one of the things that I learned the most was you can have property management companies we've all had experience. I would say we were all good business operators in our own markets, but you bring those people together, and we were all doing business so differently that it became a challenge. And I think when you start looking at some of these big aggregator companies that are trying to buy up property management companies across the US, I think one of the things that they learned, and you will know this more than me firsthand because you wound up being in a position where you were trying to onboard companies at Pure, but the way people do things, not just legally, not just process wise, but the mentality behind it. You know, you and I were very in tune with, I would have clients, and I'm not saying this is the way people should run their business, but it's the way I ran my business. I would have clients that I might not talk to for 4 or 5 years. I mean, I have clients that when we sold the company 20 some years later, they were clients of ours when I bought the company. They were one of the original, 31 doors, but I might not talk to them for 4 or 5 years. But if they called me, we'd talk for 45 minutes about the weather, the kids, sports, whatever. And then we'd eventually get around to solving whatever they called about. And we would just have that relationship to where they just had such immense trust for us that they didn't have to call, and they weren't questioning invoices, and they weren't questioning our maintenance decisions. And then we had other partners that came into the mix where their philosophy was, I'm going to squeeze every nickel out of every possibility. And yes, we're going to experience a lot of churn. And yes, our tenants aren't going to love us, but that doesn't really matter because we're going to make a lot of money. And those two types of philosophies do not mix well together. And I think that might be.
Yeah. And I would add the property manager and client relationship dynamic to that too. Like there were some partners that like, they're never allowed to talk to me. They can't call me. I'm not available. Yeah. As a matter of fact, we don't have a phone. It's only by email. And my email's
do you remember, you remember that conversation we had about whether or not we were even going to have phone numbers, public facing phone numbers? Right. Some of our partners wanted nobody to be able to call anybody except for on acquisition or business development, but nobody else on the team would have a phone number inbound. You would have to email them. And that
Hi, this is Comcast.
Yeah.
How can I avoid your call?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
yeah, I do remember that. So anyway, I think those philosophies just go heavily into, I think, you have a company culture, and then you merge multiple cultures, but then each of those companies, those individual companies, when they were individual, have their own culture, if you will, with their customer base, their clients. And that culture goes heavily into what you can or what you provide and what you don't provide as a service to your clients. I just remember, so often you were very high touch in your market. Not high touch in the sense that you would talk to your clients all the time.
Yeah, not frequent touch, but high touch.
Yeah, high touch, quality touch.
Yeah.
And at Independence Capital, we were higher touch in the sense of frequency. We would communicate like, hey, tenant gave notice. There was a bunch of points of contact. And I wanted to give the most frictionless experience as possible, as did you. But then there were partners like, let's find some friction. Let's put some salt on that friction. You know what I mean? Like there's just some things like, why would you do it that way? It's just if I was the consumer, I'm going to put myself in Johnny investor shoes here. That would really piss me off. I want, like when the fridge is broken, I want to know that I can get a hold of somebody so I can actually authorize them to get the fridge fixed or whatever. I'm just using a stupid generic scenario, but it's a different philosophy, and therefore it created a different culture within the customer base of each one of those branches.
Right. And so just so that it doesn't come across as a bashing session or something like that.
Yeah.
Each one of those individual cultures were working somewhere.
They were successful. Yeah.
Right. It's when you brought those cultures together that caused problems. And so, and we'll get into sort of how do we actually merge those companies together and the systems. I think one of the areas that caused us some challenges that took us a long time. I think we finally figured it out as we were sort of in the last phase of Home Vault, but we delegated the process creation to sort of one of the companies and one of their, we used a lot of their philosophies, but even more so, one of the things that I've since really become, I would say, an expert on is the flow of information. So I want to give just a couple of pointers. If somebody was looking at trying to start or build or merge a property management company, we jumped right into trying to document and automate our processes. And really, that's step 4 of what we should have done. We went right to step 1, but we should have been really clear with our whole team. Anytime you do something, you need to be clear of the purpose. What's the purpose of why we're doing it? And then who are the people involved? Like, who are the stakeholders, whether it's a tenant, a landlord, a vendor, what team members, what departments. You get the purpose, then the people, then the policy. And frankly, we skipped over, we did not differentiate the difference between a policy and a process or a procedure. Mm-hmm. And so we had people in the company that didn't understand what our policies were. And when the process didn't work or it didn't just flow as it was supposed to, we had people that really didn't know what to do. And because when we merged, we took a lot of our key frontline people and elevated them to a management status. We took a lot of our people that knew what the heck to do, whether it was a documented process or not. We elevated them to a position where they actually had less influence on the actual delivery of our service. And so, really not being clear on the policy that guided the process, and then not having the people that could be making decisions intuitively based on how they should actually interact based on our policy, our philosophy, our vision, whatever. I think that was just, 2 things back to back that just really created a lot of challenges for us.
Yeah, thanks for summarizing. I think it's so important to understand how a process or a system should be developed. It's just, we as humans, I think, try to shortcut stuff and let's just get down and document and do this, just get it on paper, basically. That is not what you want to do. There has to be a lot of considerations. And, it's funny in the software world, it said that it's about the 3rd iteration of something where you actually start hitting the mark. We were on our 3rd iteration when we sold and I think we were on that uphill climb again. It was really good. We were recognizing the issues. We were making the corrections to be the type of service we wanted to deliver. And a lot of that was my opinion of decentralization. I always thought, when we merged, we would find a lot of economies of scale, that we would be able to centralize a lot of things. And I quickly reshaped my framework to say, you know what, it's actually decentralization, because property management is a market specific business and a relationship business according to the marketplace. It took me a while to, I was quick to figure that out, but it took a while to then reshift the company back into that direction. I think our first acquisition was intended to be a decentralized acquisition where we're not going in and stirring the pot and trying to make it corporate level decisions on their behalf. I think that's actually where I see a lot of fault at Pure right now, in my experience. And I don't want to get into this too much, but they're not doing a decentralization approach. They're doing a centralization approach. And look, there's pros and cons to any way you do anything, but that's a big pill to swallow for the frontline staff, the experienced staff that gets to talk to your clients every single day. That's very hard for them to swallow.
Yeah. I do want to do a deep dive on our sale to Pure what that looked like. You know, we do have some non-disclosure things that we're not allowed to talk about, but that doesn't mean that there's not a lot of information that we could share on lessons learned, questions that maybe if somebody was looking to do that, questions that they would want to get answers to prior to deciding whether it's Pure or a local competitor, just questions that you want to get answered on a sale. But before we do that, because we may leave that for a future episode, because there's a lot to unpack there. Let's talk a little bit about as we rolled it out, as we rolled into the merger. We're still in the honeymoon phase of us coming together. We decided to do this merger and actually signed all of our paperwork. I believe it was December of 2019 was when we actually executed on it. But we didn't actually roll it out and launch it to the marketplace until a few months later because we were working on things behind the scenes. But do you remember what our launch looked like in the industry?
I remember we all changed our profile pictures on our various social media platforms. It was Home Vault green, baby, all the way. I think we had an interesting timing event here that COVID, you know, we had signed these agreements, most of the agreements, we had some lingering ones till the end, but signed most of the agreements December-ish, January-ish, whatever it was. COVID hits in March. And then we announce, I think July 15th was our announcement date. So COVID provided, because we were already developing and ramping up Home Vault Academy, it provided a platform. If there's any positivity to COVID, I don't know, it's to be determined, but it that was a platform because there was just a lot of questions in the industry on how to handle this and how to collect rent that and how to lease properties. And you know, I always came from a tech standpoint in our, you know, online applications. I never had a paper application. I didn't want paper applications. Online applications, online rent payments, online maintenance reporting, and all that stuff. So it was a nice avenue for that. I guess it was a nice platform that it delivered for us. So Home Vault Academy was great there. And then as far as like the announcement, I mean, all I remember is we made a bunch of announcements on Home Vault Academy. We kind of built some hype on some of our webinars, and then we made an announcement, and it felt to me like it was a very positive thing to the industry. I think it had a lot of good resulting events for us personally. Like we were, several of us would speak at NARPM and other events, and that was positive. So that's my recollection. I want to hear your side of it. Like you're hinting at something more here that I don't remember, obviously.
No, it was just you know, we were so excited. We were even if you remember, we did like a 20-day countdown where it was just a green image with the number, the countdown, and we shared that in several groups, and we got people just really questioning you know, what is this all about? And I don't think it would have had the same impact today if you were to try to do something like that today, but it was because we were in that period of COVID where the government had told us we were non-essential workers and we were supposed to just stay home, not even leave the house. But at the same time, we still had clients we needed to serve. And so what were we going to do to serve those clients? And so at the time that, you know, COVID really impacted our mission on the Home Vault side, because we were, you know, the plan was to go to all these conferences and build relationships and talk to people about the platform that we were rolling out and have people plug into that to help them run their business, and they would become an ownership of that, you know, part owner of that location and a part owner in the bigger Home Vault organization. And so it really derailed our ability to do that. But at the very same time, because everybody was kind of like, well, what do we do? How do we handle, what are best practices for showing properties when, you know, people have COVID and you're not allowed to leave your house and all of these things? Home Vault Academy was born at a time where it was just a perfect timing for that. And we had an audience. I remember, you know, now there's there's probably 3 webinars a week in our industry, but back in 2020 there wasn't. And I remember on our Zoom platform, we were able to have, I think, up to 500 people in our webinar, and we exceeded that. We had to bump up how many people we could have because we were putting on 2-hour webinars, and we were having more than 500 people attend, and people were wanting in that we had that cutoff of 500. So it was just a great time. We had a lot of vendors that were involved in supporting it, and it was just a really good, fun time in the industry. It was almost like a different era. And I remember one of the things that we talked about, I really had this philosophy that it was, I'm sure you'll remember this, but it was 36 months to extinction or evolution. And I kept saying that there's going to be technology that comes along. There's going to be competition that comes along. There's going to be other companies, big aggregators coming along. And if you're doing everything 100% right now, and you continue to do that for the next 36 months, you're going to be out of business. You just don't know it. And 36 months is 2 iterations of Moore's law, and I'm not going to get into that now. But if you look at where we are now compared to where we are in 2020, I mean, that came true, and it's only going to accelerate the amount of disruption in the industry from every direction, from every other industry. It's going to be exciting, scary, and challenging for companies moving forward. With
I mean, AI has just been another I don't know what icing on the cake of that statement, because it's there's just so much to that. I don't even want to get into that right now, but it's fascinating to see this evolution. That's what I love about business, is the evolution part. We get to evolve. But hey, Tony, this has been great. Let's make it a wrap here. Let's call this good for episode 2. And next one, let's talk about the sell to Pure, how that was, what our roles were at Pure, how we left Pure, or what we did and what we didn't do, and then chat through that. That'll be super fun. And eventually we'll stop reminiscing about the past, because there are a lot of lessons here learned, right? And this reflection, I think that's fantastic. But then we'll get to some really great stuff for the future here.
Yep. That sounds like a great plan. I think there's a lot to uncover with what we went through with just the Pure acquisition. And again, it's more of sharing the experience so that we can just help anybody else that might be interested in what it looks like to buy a company or sell a company, and the lessons learned. I mean, a year later, neither one of us are there. The company, it's almost been a year for both of us since we've left there. And what lessons we've learned. So I'm excited to talk about that, but I'm also equally excited to, now that we've kind of talked about who we are, where we've come from, where we see the industry going, and have some conversations that are impacting our future and the future of the industry, and getting into those conversations. So that's going to be great.
Awesome. That's a wrap. Thanks, Tony.
All right. It's in the can.
All right.
Thanks for listening. We'll be back next time to cut through the noise of what it really takes to be a successful entrepreneur.
If today's episode hit home, share it with a friend, and be sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next one.